we are going to get started with our keynote address. Feel free to continue, of course, eating during the presentation, but we want to make sure that we can give our special and honored guest her time to speak to you all today, because I know many of you have come to listen to this session. So without too much further ado, I'd like to introduce Serena Lowe. Serena is a senior policy advisor with the Administration on Community Living's Office of Policy Analysis and Development. And what makes her especially wonderful and perfect to come talk to you all today is that she serves on the CMS HCBS implementation team, which is responsible to help support states in the successful implementation of the settings rule and to provide feedback and technical assistance. So basically, if there was an expert who could provide advice, it would be Serena. And that's why we're so thrilled to have her talk to you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you to the state of Utah and also to Utah's amazing disability rights group here. I mean, you guys I was just telling them over lunch that it was my pleasure. It was actually an honor to be invited to come because I work at the Administration for Community Living within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So we provide and manage all of the grant authorities for the DD networks around the country, including the PNAs. And so I have an opportunity to kind of, look at PNAs throughout the country and interact with them, just like I do the DD councils and the University Centers of Excellence on Developmental Disabilities. And I would love to say that they're all amazing, but we're going to have a lot of talk about quality and variation of quality today together. And, there's some variation in the country, even in our PNA infrastructure. You guys have the top PNA in the country, and bar none. And it's a real gift, actually, to have that in a state and have such a great partner working side by side with your state government on these important issues. So my hat's off to you all, and thank you so much for having me here. It's really a privilege and pleasure. So I am in the government. Please don't hold out against me. I know we have some of my state brethren in the government here today too, Kevin and his great team. But I started out as an advocate. I started out very early on as an advocate when I was 5 years old, and my best friend who had an intellectual disability and her foster brother wanted to go bike riding with us down the street. And the foster mother said that Albert, the brother, couldn't go because he had spina bifida. And so we did not like to be told no. So we got together and got a wagon and a jump rope and tied it to the back of, not the safest thing, right? But tied it to the back of the bikes, and he went. And that's where advocacy starts, right? Is when any of us kind of see people being treated differently or something being presumed about what they can and can't do. And we step in because we know them and we know their potential, right? And we've seen them overcome amazing barriers and obstacles. So we believe in them. And that's what advocacy is about, right? Is a belief in allowing people to be their best selves. And so I still consider myself an advocate. And so far, that has not gotten me fired. We'll see. Some people see that as a huge asset, and others not so much. I don't know. We're trying to win hearts and minds one person at a time. So I wish I had all day with you. I think we have a lot to talk about. This stuff is hard work. I'm just going to say it. And I have a lot of slides, and I'm not going to go through even half of them because I'd rather it be a little conversational, and I'd like you guys to have an opportunity to talk to me too and tell me what's going on here and answer questions if I can to the best of my ability. But if I had a whole day with you, we'd go through all the slides because they're kind of cool too. But I would say that I know it is not without a lot of trepidation. all of this change that's been going on in recent years, right? Whether it's about the federal home and community-based services settings criteria, new Olmstead actions from the Department of Justice. For those of you that are in employment activities of persons with disabilities, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act was big in your world. There's a lot, right, coming down. And all of that is happening in a very direct way, as well as we're in really uncertain times, right, about the overall future of Medicaid as we know it, okay? So I'm trying to get on board with this idea that we got to get comfortable being uncomfortable for a while. All right, and voice our discomfort with each other and have what I like to call a candid conversation. So this is what I would like to propose we do for the next 40 minutes, and we'll see how it goes. And this is why when I tell you what I want to do in 40 minutes, you'll be like, oh, this would take all day. So we'll get as far as we can, and then maybe you'll have me back some other time if I'm lucky. I think we should have a candid conversation about our collective roles and responsibilities to this work, because it really doesn't matter if the rule is here or not. We're all in this because we clearly have some kind of personal and professional dedication and commitment to helping improve the lives of individuals with disabilities and helping them, right, optimize their goals and pursue their dreams and actions. But we also know that just like in marriage, it ain't perfect, right? And we have a lot of work to do. And oftentimes the systems that we work in and interact and engage in are so complex and convoluted and bureaucratic that sometimes we do more harm than good, right? And I think we just have to be open with ourselves on that and open about what the potential is for doing better. And so I'd like to have that candid conversation with you all today about where we can all kind of move the pendulum forward. And that requires a bit of a reality check about, data and that sort of thing. And that's the stuff I'm going to kind of fly through, because I'm going to presume that you're here because there's work to be done. Right? Not just in the state or in your backyard, but nationwide. There's still a lot of work to be done. And so I won't belabor that a whole lot. But I'd like to get to is a point of talking about visualizing our Northern Star together. If we're not where we want to be, then what does that look like? And can we kind of get some consensus about what we need to do to get there? So careful reflection, let's start on a high note. All right. Does anyone remember? I'm not a smoker, but I remember in the 70s when I was growing up and on television, when we first got television, I was 7 years old, and Long Slims is before the cigarette industry got really heavily regulated, had all of these, you've come a long way, baby, right? We have come a long way, all right? And I'm not one to, sit on our merits and our accomplishments, but we have come a long way in 60 years, right? We've come from really abnormal, highly institutional environments where people have no choices, no privacy, really are treated, more like they're in zoos than in homes, right? And no dreams. And we've really made a huge tide, both in our federal civil rights framework and our public policy, and also just in what we're doing in the real world, right? We've learned how to do things better and to help people get out of kind of what used to be the norm and what we thought was right to a lot more stories and pictures that look like what I'm showing you here. People living in typical communities, working, volunteering, making friends, establishing social relationships, marrying if they want to. I always tell, though, my friends with significant disabilities when they tell me, I have a lot of friends in this space, obviously, and whenever one of them says that they're about ready to get engaged or that they got engaged, I always say, okay, but I'm just warning you now, marriage is an institution. So just be careful. You sure you want to do that? Says the 42-year-old single mom. So take that with a grain of salt. But we see more and more exceptions, right, to what society often still feels is kind of the normal path for people. We see people say, no, we want to work with you, we want to get a job, we want to earn, and we want to live in a place that we know our roommates and we like our roommates, and we want to have a life that kind of looks like other people's. And so reality check, now that we know we've come that far, is kind of where we need to go. And so as you all know, home and community-based services, the primary funder of those is Medicaid in this country, and that started in the 1980s. And it was really a response from states and advocates and even providers to say, hey, there's other ways that we can provide services to people. We don't have to send them always to an institution or a nursing home or a mental hospital. We can do better, but we need some flexibilities. And so, as you all know, the Home and Community-Based Service Waiver Program started, and there's been a multitude of other state plan authorities and other flexibilities that states have been given along the way, and that was in 1982. And so, we're at 2017, and my mom hates when I say this, but, I think it's probably time for home and community-based services to have a facelift. I mean, it's been a while, and I think if I could leave you with anything today about the rule, and I don't call it the rule, I call it the settings criteria because that's what it is. And there were two reasons why the feds did this, and this started 11 years ago during the Bush administration in the first request for information. And it took us 9 years to figure out what community meant, right? Thousands of perspectives and comments and all of that. But at the end of the day, there were two goals with the federal requirements. Number one, to have an even playing field, a baseline of what, when one state says this is home and community based, there should be something in the other state that has at least those kind of minimal basic features. And the reason is because there were things that state A would be funding in one state and calling it an institution, and in another state was calling it a group home. And in some states there were things that were being called supported employment, and in other things that were being called sheltered workshops or something else. And so it was about getting clear about what is home and community based, and are there some basic criteria that all settings that are providing home and community based services should have. So it was goal number one. Goal number two was, can we start to systematically elevate the quality of service provision in the home and community-based space through Medicaid? Because if we can do it right in Medicaid, then other systems and payers may follow. And so those are the goals. Easy, right? Easy peasy. No problem. We can get this done in a couple of years. Well, it's a lot of work. I show you this graphic because I think it's always interesting. You will hear our colleagues at CMS say very proudly that in 2014, it was kind of the first year that they could say, out of all the Medicaid funding in the country that goes to long-term care and long-term supports and services, finally, a majority of that goes to home and community-based services. And they talk about this all the time. They're very proud that we've moved closer and closer to a parity in terms of what we're investing in institutional care versus home and community-based services. I always have a little heartburn with that because I know that things haven't changed that dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, we are moving, but I always question that a little bit about, well, what is in that umbrella of home and community-based? Like, what is that growing amount of money going to? And I always challenge states in every state I'm at, so Utah will be no different. If you are stewards of public funds and taxpayer dollars, and you are the payer, you have got to know and understand what it is you are paying for. And you cannot gloss over that. And that is not an easy exercise. You have to get in the trenches and understand, what are we paying for? And what kinds of outcomes does that look like? Is that translating to in our individual beneficiaries' lives? And I think I would offer, at least I can speak at federal level, that we've become so bureaucratically entrenched that it's really hard to lift our heads up from all the paperwork and this, the day in and day out meetings and all that, and actually get into reality of, what is it that we're paying for? What are we doing all this for? What should it look like? We are seeing rapid growth in Medicaid long-term supports and services. And again, it's like newsflash, like everybody knows this, right? This map is interesting, and I want to give you a cautiously optimistic thumbs up, because you are one of the top tier states that are spending, I think it's, let me make sure. You're spending, you're in that green zone. So you're spending 41 to 50% of your Medicaid home, long-term care funds are going to home and community-based services. Again, you got to get under the hood and see what all does that mean in our state for us. But it's definitely trending in the right direction. And I encourage you to try to get up to the blue, but I'd like you to do it thoughtfully, right? And make sure that what you're saying you're paying for is what you're paying for. But you're heading in the right direction, and that is excellent. This is just some graphics about Medicaid participants, HCBS participants. And all I'm going to tell you is this, because it has not changed except exponentially the volume or size of funding. We continue, this is the important graph, the vast number of enrollees, as you all know, are individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, roughly 72%. And they account for, I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong. The majority of folks funds are going into individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so even though it's a smaller number of people, they are representative of roughly 70 to 72% of all HCBS funds. And that number is about, right now, $59-60 billion a year. So that's a lot of money. Even by federal government terms, that's a lot of money going into home and community-based services in this country through Medicaid. So that's the bottom line. Top 5% of the population is driving roughly 55% of the expenditures, and that's some aging and disability as well. And that's all Medicaid, okay? So I showed you just what our part of the world is when you look just at LTSS funding, but long-term care funding overall. And that's what I thought was so interesting. And I'm not, this is not a political statement. This is a kind of a challenge to any policymaker. I thought what was so interesting is that in all the Medicaid reform discussions, how many of you heard much of anything about long-term care? And yet that is the fastest growing, rapid, I mean, it's like left the train and you can't catch up with it, proportion of Medicaid spending. So even if you did any of the plans that were being discussed on the Hill by the Democrats, by the Republicans, by the White House, it would not have addressed this growing 800-pound gorilla, which you all know better than anyone because you see it every day. You see the demand and the need. This is showing you a graphic that shows you how Medicaid's share of state budgets is also rapidly growing. And so as your states are absorbing and competing to filter out their funds on different priorities, Medicaid is still the demand is still growing, and those are real threats to your system. State spending also can fluctuate from year to year. I can assure you that in Texas and Florida, it will be very tough years in Medicaid moving forward. So these are some big issues. The last thing I want to say on this, just in the Medicaid reform debate, there was a lot of discussion around methodologies and how you would forecast things like per capitas if you were going to cap Medicaid spend or block grants, and most people were relying on something called the CPI-M. I forget what the M stands for, but it's Consumer Price Index, and they were basing it on assumptions that frankly are flawed in that own index. And what this shows you is that for our constituencies, our populations were well above growth over the last 3 years than what this measure actually estimated. So we're already starting underestimating what it costs to serve people in any scheme. Now, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever. In any scheme that was floated, the methodology was wrong. So we don't know, right? We don't know what we're spending things on, and we actually don't have a good way to forecast growth. And that's pretty scary, because what I'm going to show you next, if I have it, I guess I don't have it, but you all know we have this crazy growing aging population. And in the next 3 years, the number of people that are in like the 80 to 90 category is going to triple. And those are our most expensive people with the most complex needs in our system. So these are, these are challenging times. And I would offer that we've been riding this train of deinstitutionalization for a while, and kind of taking it back to our world and what we can control today. But to what end, okay? And this was the question, the impetus of the Home and Community-Based Services rule. To what end are we doing this? And what do we want in terms of outcomes for people and for our systems? What are we going to be able to feasibly accomplish? And I would offer we've gone from largely rural government-funded institutions to more community-based institutions that continue to be, largely controlled by local governing boards. Services still staying within kind of four walls, people not interacting as much as we would ideally think being in a community would require. And so one of the other things and sticking points and tensions that, again, let's get real about here today is that moving and bettering ourselves doesn't mean what you are doing is bad. It means we have better ways of doing it now. We've learned a lot in 40 years. We've learned how to use technology, natural supports, partnerships, leverage different resources and funding. The literature has taught us a lot. We know that there are better strategies and ways of providing home and community-based services. And yet, issues still persist in a lot of our home and community-based service models that are still kind of institutional, things that we've kind of carried along with us in our history, long and winding history. So we continue to see that people oftentimes have a lack of role models, normal relationships. A lot of them, the people they interact with that don't have disabilities throughout the day are paid staff. That there's this dependency relationship that often forms, and for some reason, oftentimes for the purest of intentions, right? But Does that get us where we want to be? That oftentimes people feel like they don't have a lot of choice or ability to pursue dreams, let alone think about them for themselves. A lot of artificial environments. We put a lot of money into creating things that are maybe available down the street with a little ingenuity and partnership building. If I go into, there are some great rehabilitation providers in the country that are making tremendous changes. But if I go into one more rehabilitation that has got, it looks like it's totally been repainted, red carpeted, everything, and they've got a yoga studio and a kitchen and a hair salon, I am going to throw up. Because all that stuff is right down the road and could probably cost the provider a lot less by finding creative strategies to get people out into the community. So we still have some work to do. I threw this up because on the day side, which is what I know more about, although I've spent most of the last 3 years embedded in the residential stuff. But before then, it was all non-res for me. And, I personally think, and we'll talk about this a couple of times, but money matters. And for people that are still like, we are in the nonprofit sector, we care about the people, that's fine. But you also need to keep the lights on. And I get that. So money has to be a part of our conversation. It just has to be. Because if you don't have money going to the right things, incentivizing the right things, rewarding the right outcomes, we are never, everything that we're doing is fluff until that happens. So money is very, very important. I'm not married, but if I were to be, this guy would probably be like right up there on my courtship list. And I've used this slide since a good colleague of mine and a mentor of mine, Melissa Mills, started using it like 5 years ago, but I use it every time I can. If no mistake have you made, yet you're losing, you are, a different game you should play. And that, I think, is where we're at now, right? We're trying to figure this out together. Like, okay, Serena, so we're not there yet, so how do we get there? Like, what does it look like? Okay, so now it's candid conversation time. And I put this up because since I have been single for most of my adult life, I've had a lot of breakups. I'm an expert in breaking up or being broken up with. So it's like, it's not you, it's me. But I hear these things and it's like, you think about, so how many of you are providers? Okay, quite a few. How many are state or local government folks? Okay, and how many, most important people today, how many are advocates? Great. Okay, so good mix. Okay, so think about when you've been in a candid conversation in the field, whether it's with a provider that's not giving you what you want, and you're someone that either you're an advocate or family member and you want something different, or maybe it's a provider talking to the state saying we need more money for this or we want to try this. So think about the most recent uncomfortable, difficult conversation you've had. It probably was just like this morning, okay? And, probably one of these phrases at some point went in there, it's not you, it's us, or it's me, or, it's not my fault, though. It's maybe your fault a little bit, right? Like, because we could do this if you could only do that for us, then we could do a better job. Or can't we all just get along? We're all working hard. Like, can't you just cut us some slack? And then I love the answer. Sure, we can always get along as long as things go my way or you see them my way, And so it's like this circular conversations, right? And, this is what I heard a lot of over the last few years is that, oh my gosh, so many changes. It's going so fast. It's spiraling. And I'm just trying to provide good services to people, or I'm just trying to get ahead in my personal life and get the services I need to grow. Or, hell's bells, I'm a state person and I just can't even keep up with all the regulations you're sending. I don't even have time to read them, let alone know what it is you people want up there. So I I feel it. I feel your pain. Every day I wake up and I wonder, how did I get to DC and why am I working in government? But, be glad there's a few of us in the government that are really trying to empathize and feel the pain with you. But, I would offer that even if all that stuff wasn't coming down the pike, change was inevitable because advocates are asking for change, right? They're demanding it. We are seeing, the first couple of generations of post-IDEA, individuals coming out, and their parents and families are saying, oh, heck no, we did not work so hard to get our loved one through, 13 years of public education to come out on the other end and be told that, all they're going to be able to do is this or that, or sit at home, or there's no jobs for them, or what have you. No, and no. Like we did not do all of that for nothing. So that pressure, right, is demand. Now, oftentimes I understand that there are families that feel differently than that, and that are very concerned about all of this change and what does that mean for my loved one, and for their safety, and they're happy where they're at, and we really do not want change, and we have to honor that and respect that position. I would offer that because I haven't met a family member yet in Medicaid that's stuck in Medicaid. Okay, that's their payer, and that when there wasn't real intentional hard work, and it is hard work sometimes, to identify and explore a different way, that they weren't at least receptive to looking at a different approach. So again, very hard work, but we got to rise above the storm and get started. And you all have. We've been working really hard the last few years. I don't know about you. I could use a vacation. But I think that one positive thing, I hope, that all of this new federal policy and Olmstead activity, et cetera, over the last several years has done is kind of propelled this transition in thinking, where we kind of were stuck in this issue of, well, these are our models, and this is where people go, and everybody's happy, and we're just trying to keep things moving, to a sense of, maybe it is time to broaden our horizons and our beneficiaries' horizons, and really challenge ourselves to really look at what things like community integration means. So, visualizing our North Star. I mean, I want to say that the rule tried to do that. Sometimes policy is like a poetry of words, and it really says some good stuff, but then operationally is really difficult. The rule has some poetry in it, but it gets really convoluted quickly. That being said, there was an aspiration there, right? And it was kind of this Northern Star about, let's start seeing that, it's saying plain admission, let's start seeing more, instead of an exception to the rule, let's start seeing more people in the communities that we're in, doing things that they want to be doing, having control over their personal resources, their schedules, having a say in where they spend their day and how they spend it, and not having to go bowling every Tuesday and Thursday at 3:00 because everyone else wants to if they hate bowling. Okay, but and that's a tired example, right? But that's the one that we use. But really, how do we really help people start giving, the kind of integration that we all say we support? And this has evolved, our evolved thinking over time has led to ongoing transformation. This is written by actually a provider that I worked with about 7 years ago in Tennessee, largest provider in the state for individuals with intellectual disabilities, largest workshop, and 2 very large adult day habilitation centers. And when we offered to go in with the state and give them technical assistance, they refused 5 times. I hate being told no. It's just, I don't like it. It just makes me want to get in there more. And so a year and a half of courting and a lot of charm later, they said, okay, fine, come show us what you've got. And we sent in what we could with available resources and some of the best people and thinkers that we could find. And within 3 months, the head of the programs called me and said, I want you to know that we're having a board meeting on Friday, and I'm going to announce that we're going to close our workshop in a year. And I was like, whoa. I was like, are you sitting down? Like, let's back up a little bit. And I was like, I can see in your voice you've drank the Kool-Aid. You see that there are other ways to, diversify your approach to community integration, and I think that's wonderful. But if you do that, you will, get fired and lose your job. And if they keep you, you may fail, because with the dream and vision has to come some work, And so he said, okay, well, maybe I won't tell him in a year. But, to his credit, less than 2 years later, they did close that sheltered workshop. And everybody that was in there, it was 85 or 88 people, were in either career exploration and discovery, supported employment, and community, integrated community-based day activities, et cetera. And now they're working to transition people into integrated community day activities. That doesn't mean he hasn't said, I'm getting rid of the day habilitation centers, and I didn't ask him to. But he's saying, we know now we can do better. And he was one of the people that I went in and I said, well, you got a brand new yoga studio in here. Well, you just go down the street. I just saw one as I was driving in. And so, that is transformation. But it required some evolved thinking. And he wrote this then when he went and started training other providers in the state. And he said, what do we believe? Because it really, at the end of the day, is about your values. And if you really do believe that people learn best when they're segregated or in a congregate setting with other people with disabilities, and that's it, or that the best way to learn is in a simulated environment, or that best choices are made from limited exposure and limited experiences, and then I would offer that this is probably not the speech for you. But what he said is, if we don't start embedding from day one in our core values what our Northern Star is and what we really believe to be the potential and the opportunity here for the work we do, then we shouldn't be in this business. And, anyway, I stole his slide because I could not have said that better, and I think it's better coming peer-to-peer, and I'm not a provider, though I have had the pleasure of working with many. And so he went on to talk about the kinds of core values that should be for everyone, and I would offer, if you've looked at the Home and Community-Based Services Rule, you would see some similarities there. And so these are some of the issues that we tried to get to, and I'm not going to get into all of this, but I think we need to get to mapping a way forward. So again, money matters, and it drives practice, and I just want you to kind of have that in the back of your mind throughout the next few slides, which I'm going to go through. Who went to the introduction to the HCBS Rural Breakout session? Okay. All right. So if you need to stretch, go to the restroom or anything, next 5 minutes, probably time to do it, because this is going to be a little bit of a crash course of what you guys got. But, there are 7 criteria, 7, The rule is almost 200 pages long, but there are 7 criteria that every home and community-based service, every setting in which someone is receiving Medicaid-funded home and community-based services should have. And they're here, integrated in and supports access to the greater community, provides opportunities for seeking employment should people choose to do that, ensuring the individual, receive services in the community to the same degree that other people have access to the community, that they are able to choose the services they need instead of being told what they need, and the providers that are going to provide them, or the staff that will provide those services. That's really important. Optimizing individual initiative, autonomy, and independence in making life choices, ensuring individuals' rights to privacy, respect, and freedom from coercion and restraint. I think I cut them. Oh, and to have an option for a non-disability specific setting. So a lot of people ask me, well, what does that mean exactly? That is not the responsibility of the provider. That's a responsibility of the state. Okay? State is the funder and has to make sure that there is a number of non-disability specific options so that people qualify, eligible to receive services in your state, don't want to go to a place where everyone else has a disability, that they have that option, okay? But, and here's the big but, the state's the funder. So if they've got to build capacity of non-disability specific settings, providers, you need to play along because that's additional revenue potential. So it's a partnership, right? Now, if someone comes to you and says, and all you do this certain service, and that's what you were asked to do, and the person says, I don't want to be here, I want to be somewhere else, then that is the time to talk to that person's case manager about what something else could look like for them. People shouldn't be stuck in places they don't want to be in under Medicaid HCBS. That's the bottom line. For those that are in provider-controlled and or owned settings, there's additional criteria, and this is for residential primarily, but things related to tenancy rights, having a legally enforceable agreement similar to what any of us would expect in a landlord relationship, rentee relationship, having access, having privacy in their sleeping unit and living unit, having lockable entrance doors where not everyone can come in, but only appropriate staff have keys, having choice of roommates, having freedom to furnish and decorate their sleeping quarters, their living areas, etc., access to food, access to visitors, so on and so forth. And so, these are things that I think we take for granted unless we're in a system that tells us we can't do it. And so I would offer, and I understand that sometimes operationally is where these things can get a little complex. So I'm not trying to minimize how hard some of the work is to implement the home and community-based services setting criteria. But what I will offer is that I don't think those 2 slides or 3 slides that I just showed you, which is really the bulk of the rule. That's what you as those of you that are providers and also advocates need to be aware of. Advocates from where your rights are and providers from what the requirements are. That is a baseline that I believe settings should be able to get to. And there's a lot of good work going on around it. Now, you might say, look, I have someone who has Prader Willis, and they cannot have access to food every day or all day every day because that is not right. But that's why there are modification options through the person-centered plan. And I would offer that the heart of this rule is around person-centered planning, because if we get person-centered planning right on the front end, the services that are provided to those individuals, the providers and staff that are engaged, the familial and social partnerships that are necessary to the success of that plan, all of that becomes better tailored and targeted from the outset. So person-centered planning is absolutely essential. Anybody here that are case managers? Wow. That is great. I'm shocked, and I'll tell you why. Most of the time I ask that question, and I get one hand, which scares me because this rule is about them too. It's about you and your work. You are critical to the success of all of us. No pressure, by the way. But you're critical to the success of all of us elevating our game in HCBS. Because if you're not doing intentional, exploratory, experiential, thoughtful work on the front end with your clients, the person-centered plan is not that valuable or useful. It is key and central to the success of this work. The rule goes away tomorrow, I would still say the same thing. It is critical to improving quality in our field. And that is a big, I'm pat myself on the back there. That's a big evolution point for me, because when I first got in this work like 10 or 12 years ago on the policy side, I was like, person-centered planning, that just sounds so fluffy. We pay for that stuff? We do that stuff? What? I've come a long way, right? And I share that because we all will evolve over the course of this work together, right? And I have a lot more to learn. You all, I would offer, still have a lot to learn in this too. So settings. So how many of you know what I'm talking about when I say your setting needs to be assessed? If you're receiving services in setting, if you're providing them, they have to be assessed. And you did a provider self-assessment? Anybody? Yeah, see some nodding of heads. Okay. If you're shaking your head, go talk to Kevin. Kevin needs to talk to you. Okay. Then what happens, not that we don't totally take every word you say as truth, but, judgment is in the eyes of the beholder, and it wouldn't really be right if we just based our conclusions on whether or not you meet the settings criteria based on what a provider thinks they do, right? And so there's this validation step, which is the responsibility of the state, but they can work with a multitude of partners. So, for example, your state worked with the P&A, who did some exploratory site visits on their own, and very instructional, right? Instructive for all of us, really with a different lens. Other states are working with their USEDs. Some are doing consumer beneficiary surveys. Imagine that. Let's ask consumers what they think about the services they're receiving, and does this gel with the requirements? I would offer to you, I think you're in the validation process right now, and that's a long, lengthy process. And I would offer that most states that seem to be doing that very intentionally tend to have a large percentage of providers that have some work to do. Okay? That doesn't mean that you're not going to comply with the rule. It doesn't mean that you will. It means everyone's got some work to do. I get very nervous if I see a state say, hey, we've got 99% full compliance. And as soon as I start talking to them about, well, how did you come about with that? Unless you had two settings in the whole state, how did that come about? And we have a conversation. There's usually some fidelity issues, right, with the process. So we really have been encouraging states to be very intentional with this. And because of that, it's taking some time. And so the first thing that the new administration did with Seema Burma's leadership, which I think is great, is give all states 3 additional years. And that doesn't mean like, okay, we can rest and we can, no, you got to keep working, because it's still going to be hard to even meet that 2022 deadline in some ways, right? So keep working, but just know you have some additional time. And that's where the remediation comes in. So I'll just say one quick thing about heightened scrutiny, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to wrap it up with a few final thoughts at the end. How heightened scrutiny is in the rule. There was this kind of recognition that there are things out there that may have the characteristics of an institution or may be isolating to people with HCBS, receiving HCBS in those settings from the community, but that they might require some additional scrutiny between the state and CMS in the review. And so these are anything that's on the grounds of a public institution or that are inside the same building of a public or private nursing home or hospital or inpatient treatment facility. Those kind of things, people really kind of understand what we're talking about there. And there's strategies for making sure that those things can comply with the rule, should those providers want to meet that challenge. This third area is settings that isolate. In typical federal talk, nobody was explicit about what this was. And so states have been all over the place in how they're interpreting settings that isolate. My thought is this is what the guidance says, and I think it'll hold true. If something is built intentionally for people with disabilities, where they're living there, the majority of services that one would need are on the campus or in the same location, and the location is intentionally blocked or isolated from the community, so no one else can get in, right? That is what the guidance has said is isolating. Does that mean that could not become HCBS? No, but it does mean it has some work to do. And so I want to leave you with creating a baseline. So this is talking about some of the operational issues that we've seen and that we're working with states on. Just some emerging issues on this. Large congregate facility-based settings should definitely be carefully reviewed to identify gaps and challenges in complying with the criteria. I have a hard time thinking that there's any large congregate facility-based setting in any state that is 100% compliant with this rule today. I could be wrong, and I encourage states to tell me I'm wrong. And I encourage you to tell me I'm wrong if you think you've got this. But those are the ones that are going to have a lot of work to do in transformation. Can it be done? Yes. I gave you an example. That's one of a long line of examples that we're aware of. But it takes a commitment on behalf of that provider leadership and their families and the board and the local community. That's why the work takes a little longer. Reverse integration. So this is a strategy. A lot of people ask, if we bring people in from the community, is that enough? And the answer is no. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I encourage that. I think it should be free-flowing. You should have people coming in, and you should have your people going out into the community. It cannot be the sole way that you're trying to assure community integration is simply by bringing people on site. Group versus individualized. We've said if they're in individual supported employment, if they're receiving their day supports individualized in the community, if they live in their own private homes, the state can presume that there is compliance with the settings criteria. So that being said, anything that people are grouped for the purposes of receiving HCBS for, so group-supported employment, if there's a setting attached to that, like an enclave, supported living where it's provider-controlled and owned and it's group, those things need to be assessed and validated by the state, okay? There's a lot of implications, and this is where I think I'll end, although, again, I would have loved to spend another hour with you all, but actually talking less and listening more. I don't think a state can do its charge in complying with this rule, or even, frankly, complying with Olmstead, if it's not taking a serious look at its service definitions and reimbursement methodologies. You just can't. You can say all the things you want to in the world, but if you are still disincentivizing integrated, community-based, service settings and activities, because you're not paying for them in the right way, then you have not really gotten your hands dirty yet. And providers, that doesn't mean an unlimited amount of funding for every individual, but it means we have to get smart and creative and working together on, in Utah, what does that look like? How are we going to fund what we just talked about in a way that is productive? And I leave you with that challenge and offer that you're not the only state, and I'm not trying to get judgy, but I think that might be an area where there's some work to be done and an opportunity. And I would challenge everybody to kind of think about that. So on that note, I'm going to look at this. See, I had all day. So, this is a question I want to leave everybody with. What do I need to do next? What's my role in this? Collective action is just that. It's collective. You can't be sitting here like this saying, I'm not doing this. I can't do it. It's not possible. It is critical that everyone is committed, and some things may be coming down the pike. I don't know. I couldn't tell you what the state of Medicaid's going to look like. Does that change the need? Not at all. Right? Does that change the fact that people deserve to have a right to participate in their communities, to live and work in the community, to have dreams and choices about how they spend their lives? No. So the big challenge is going to be holding true and holding ourselves accountable to that Northern Star during some really rocky and rough times ahead, right? Because, we got to be in it to win it. And on that note, I will stop, and if there's time, I'd be happy for a couple of questions. Is there time? They're like, no. Okay, they're saying no.